Welfare, bread, and circus were basically distraction tactics used by the ruling elite who would offer promises of free stuff to ingratiate themselves with the public. In the previous episode, we started a timeline that chronicled the parallels between the ancient Roman Empire and the United States of America today. When we left off, the Roman Empire was deteriorating thanks to the inflation caused by deficit spending on war and public works. Their government was constantly making things worse by meddling with their economy. Now, their empire was stretched to its limit and under constant attack from barbarians. The ongoing cost of war, plus the huge amounts of deficit spending, was bringing Rome to its knees. Now we're going to continue our journey through to the fall of Rome and learn of more striking parallels with the United States along the way.
The Romans were the first culture to have social programs. The Athenians had great public works, and they had the expense of war. But in Rome, they had the expense of all their great public works. They had the expense of massive armies occupying foreign lands, and they had the expense of social programs. During the end of the Roman Empire, Rome's population was approximately 1 million people, and 200,000 of them, 20%, were receiving daily distributions of wheat.
In the story, welfare, bread, and circus were basically distraction tactics used by the ruling elite who would offer promises of free stuff to ingratiate themselves with the public. There's a famous quote from the satirist Juvenal who summed up the situation very succinctly: "Give them bread and circus, and they will never revolt." The citizens felt like they were getting these things for free when they were actually paid for by a crushing double blow of continuous currency. In the end, the only way that the Roman rulers could enforce this tax collection was by doubling down on their stifling bureaucracy. The size of their government compared to the private sector exploded. Business became incredibly difficult, and many simply gave up. Steve Forbes just mentioned how difficult the situation became for farmers, or husbandmen as they were referred to in the past. Here's a quote that backs that up from Lactantius around 300 AD. "There began to be fewer men who paid taxes than there were who received wages, so that the means of the husbandman, being exhausted by enormous impositions, the farms were abandoned, cultivated grounds became woodland, and universal dismay prevailed."
All of these tourists go through the Colosseum here, all amazed at the ruins of a great civilization. And I have to ask myself, are they asking themselves, what happened to these people? Why did this thing fall into ruin? Everybody goes and they buy these trinkets at the gift shops and postcards and books, and they have their pictures taken here and there. I don't think any of them are thinking about the fact that most countries on the planet are doing exactly the same thing today.
Most of what Americans know, I fear, is what movie stars are doing, what sports stars are doing, and what occurred on the last installment of Jerry Springer or some other reality show. And the food stamps are not even food stamps anymore. They give you a credit card that you can buy your food with, so that you look like you can actually afford to eat as opposed to living off the dole. It's very similar.
People's relationship to money in a country like America, the biggest economy in the world, is based entirely on the benefits they get from consuming and consumerism. And right now, you have an era of popularization of drugs that are being used, like Prozac and other drugs, that people are taking massive quantities of while they're consuming popular culture for instant gratification. So you have instant gratification enhanced by drugs with a consumer culture with easy credit. So people are literally high all day long. They're consuming, they're on drugs, they've got cheap sugar, they've got cheap high fructose corn syrup in America thanks to those massive government subsidies. So they're basically spinning their tits 24/7, 365. Now, as soon as that value proposition changes and you're not getting high as easily as you did yesterday, the cost of getting blitzed out of your skull on cheap drugs, cheap sugar, and cheap entertainment tips to an actual cost where you've got to actually put in a day's labor, then you're going to see social unrest. Then you're going to see real change because those people suddenly are going to be facing reality without the benefit of being on drugs. And that's going to be a day when suddenly this economic model of consumption at the expense of humanity comes to a screeching halt.
So the ancient Romans had welfare, bread, and circus. Today, the USA has welfare and mass distraction. We've had the Colosseum-like venues for our games and theater for a long time, and now we also have people filling these Colosseums to watch digital gladiators battle each other in virtual esports events. These sporting and electronic spectacles, along with mindless entertainment like talk shows, are piped directly into our homes on TV or now even to the cell phones in our pockets. We have the same politicians who constantly make impossible promises of free stuff, and a good portion of the population are hypnotized into believing them thanks to our modern version of bread and circus. Just like in ancient Rome, the USA has increased taxation in an attempt to pay for all of the so-called free stuff. And not surprisingly, we are now also burdened with a stifling bureaucracy in order to enforce the ridiculous amount of rules, taxes, and regulations. The size and scope of government has gone past anything that the founders of our country could have imagined in their worst nightmares, and now we face the same problem as ancient Rome. There are now fewer and fewer productive individuals and businesses left to fund the buffoonery of government. Remember, governments cannot create prosperity, they can only consume it. Now we're going to take a side trip so that I can show you some of the real-world effects of all this excess bureaucracy. We're going to meet a new friend who belongs to the group of people who suffer the most under burdensome laws and taxation: small business owners and entrepreneurs. These individuals are the lifeblood of an economy, and when a government stands in their way, it stands in the way of progress, choice, and a higher standard of living for us all.
We've been in many, many restaurants all over the world. And we came back to Rome on the way to Venice solely so that we could stop and eat at Fiora di Zucca, our favorite restaurant in the world. And we've got the owner here, Roberto. We believe that government is very poor at doing things, and that if government was running your restaurant, it would not be exceptional.
We agree. He agrees, and I do too.
One of the things that we feel is sort of difficult and dangerous these days is that people are very upset with the economy and they want the government to do something about it. And I believe that the best thing that government could do is to make it easier for small businessmen like you to do your job. This is what makes the economy good.
E le personalità come
Assolutamente
le
vero,
vostre.
infatti il governo,
Absolutely
lo Stato
true. The government and the state
non aiuta assolutamente,
is really not
il nostro
helping the
non
small
viene
business
assolutamente
in any
aiutata.
way.
Se io avessi un aiuto politico, se
If
avessi
I
un aiuto
had
dello
had
Stato,
government
io
help,
avrei la voglia di aprirne uno, due,
it could
10.
probably open more of them.
You don't need government money, though. What you need is just for government to get out of the way and make it easier to go into business. Not so many rules, not so many taxes, right?
Dice sì, a questo punto non è neanche più un discorso di capitale, è un discorso di amministrazione e di tasse. Exactly.
Yeah. In ancient Rome, the government was telling you how much you could pay your workers, and no more, no less.
the government was telling you how much you could charge for that buffalo mozzarella and that flatbread. If the government told you everything you could do, would you want to stay in business even?
Assolutamente no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Diventa un McDonald's totale.
It just becomes a big McDonald's for everybody.
Yes.
This is the problem.
Right. This is the problem.
This is the problem.
Questo è-
We live in a state we call the People's Republic of California because the government has made so many rules, it is becoming very difficult for a small businessman.
Sta mettendo proprio i bastoni nelle ruote della piccola azienda.
Ma anche qua in Italia.
Here
Anche qua in Italia.
it's the same problem.
Ci stanno portando via dall'Italia per quello che mi riguarda. Cioè, se
It's
io
like
avessi
they are
il
trying to do
coraggio
everything to take us
coraggio
away from this country.
di andare in un altro
If you had the courage to go somewhere else, you probably would do it.
Ma
It's a struggle to stay here.
I have all the same problems on the other side of the world. All I want is for government to get out of the way and let me do my job.
Aiuto dal governo. Vorrei solo che si togliessero dai piedi.
sono perfettamente
I
d'accordo.
feel like I have found a brother.
Absolute agree.
My brother.
Roberto is still in Rome, and I love nothing more than supporting his exceptional restaurant whenever I'm in the area. But since filming this segment, the burdens placed on my business in California became so totally unbearable that I had no option but to move operations out of state. It pains me deeply to watch history repeat like this, as this affects people's lives, including some of the best employees and friends I ever had.
Mille grazie. Mille grazie.
Grazie a te.
The role of government, among other things, is creating an environment where people can go out and do creative things. Our founders understood we are born with certain energies. The question is, are those energies going to be directed in a positive way or a destructive way? You know, there are two ways you can get ahead. One is to steal it from your neighbor, and the other is to go out and provide a product or service that somebody else wants, create something that hadn't existed before out of your mind. You take the risk and you do it, and we all benefit from it. And that's why it's so important to have that proper environment. And what makes up that environment? Well, you don't have to be a PhD. In fact, it'll probably get in your way. One is the rule of law, where you know what the rules are. Sound money, sensible taxation. Taxes are a price and a burden. And if you lower that burden, people are able to focus and do more real things, making it easy to set up a legitimate business. Just basic rules, and people will do amazing things. Amazing amount of creativity can be released. But beware of government saying we're here to help you. Usually they end up harming us all. Government benefits, but not the rest of us.
Because of deficit spending and currency debasement, because of all the things that the U.S. is doing today, because they were trying to fund these armies that are occupying foreign lands just like the U.S. is doing today, because they were trying to have bread and circuses, what we call guns and butter, while they were funding all of this war. And all the deficit spending and currency debasement to pay for it is one of the key factors in what brought Rome down. And this great civilization faded into history, and not only that, but they lost for a long time. The technologies were lost, all the knowledge and insight that they had, the standard of living. I mean, we were plunged into the Dark Ages. But there's another side of this story that is rarely heard or explained. To me, what you're about to learn is something that absolutely cements the importance of sound money and how it is foundational to a prosperous society. As Rome was struggling in the late 4th century, Emperor Flavius Theodosius divided the Roman Empire into two parts, each to be ruled by one of his own sons. The Western Roman Empire kept Rome as its capital. Economically, it was soon crippled beyond salvation by the repetition of the misguided monetary practices you've learned about in these episodes, and it's generally considered by historians to have fallen around the year 476 AD. While the Western Empire crumbled, the Eastern Empire flourished for a further 1,000 years. Its capital was Constantinople, known today as Istanbul. The Eastern Empire changed their official language to Greek, and even though their own people at the time referred to themselves as being part of the Roman Empire, today we know them by a different name, the Byzantine Empire. So why did the Western Roman Empire fall while the East flourished? I believe a major part of the answer is contained in two simple words: sound money. The Byzantine Empire based their monetary system on a coin originally minted on a small scale by our friend Emperor Diocletian. It was called the solitas. It weighed just 4.5 grams, or 1/7 of an ounce, and was made of pure gold. The Byzantine rulers had learned from their own history, and they made a conscious choice to avoid the continual pattern of debasement that Rome had suffered from, with amazing results. They defended the purity of the solitas for a further 600 years, until 1034, when, you guessed it, the same old story started to play out. The debasement of the solitas was gradual at first, but it soon accelerated, and the coin was eliminated less than 60 years later in 1092. A new gold coin, the hippopyron, was issued in place of the solitas, and its purity was maintained at 85% gold until the early 1200s, until it too was debased. By the 1350s, it had no gold content at all and served merely as a unit of account. Is it a coincidence that this time period matches that of the decline of the Byzantine Empire? It's impossible to say for sure, but I'd like to say once again that I believe that the quality of a society is directly proportional to the quality of its money. There are many factors that all contributed to the fall of Rome, but in these episodes, I wanted to draw your attention primarily to the economics. Because when you study monetary history, two things become crystal clear. The first is that bureaucratic, managed economies always lead to disaster, and the second is that monetary debasement brings the fall of empires.
So could this same pattern of currency debasement that we have seen time and time again throughout history happen to the United States? Take a look around. It's happening right now. But the big difference this time is that it's like all those other times in history, times a million. This time it's global. But what concerns me most isn't the loss of our financial wealth, it's the loss of our freedom. All of this meddling in the free markets that they have done, and the price that we are going to pay because of that meddling, is going to cause a loss in confidence in the free market system and capitalism. We don't have free markets, and we haven't had since 1913. You cannot have free markets if you don't have free market money. The currency is 50% of every transaction there is in society, and if you have a small group of men at the central bank having a meeting each month, in the United States it's called the Open Market Committee, the FOMC, deciding how much currency there's going to be in the system and what the cost of that currency is, the interest rates, that's a manipulated market by definition. You've got a few people deciding what it's going to be. That's 50% of every transaction. Therefore, there is no transaction in this society that isn't manipulated. So we don't have, when people say that the free markets are failing, we do not have free markets. When people say that capitalism is failing, we don't have capitalism. We've got cronyism. We've got special favors being granted by Congress to the people that lobby them, and it skews the economy and warps the economy and creates all of these artificial bubbles that end up popping, and then everybody loves living in a bubble, so they just want the Fed to create the next one.
What's happening in Washington doesn't indicate that all of a sudden they're going to gain in wisdom and make the tough choices, which is sort of like getting somebody off drugs, and people don't want to quit the drugs. And our system is based on debt and inflation, and they're not going to wean themselves off. So we have to anticipate there's going to be a major collapse. But then the big question is, are we going to have a greater move toward totalitarianism and give up all our freedom, or are we going to say we still have a spirit left in this country to say, yes, we overstretched and we know what the alternative could be, and we can build a much better society?
Milton Friedman, the great economist, once said, "When government, in pursuit of good intentions, tries to rearrange the economy, legislate morality, or help special interests, the cost comes at inefficiency, lack of innovation, and loss of freedom. Government should be a referee, not an active player. In the United States, government has gone way too far. It is proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, time after time throughout history, that managed economies do not work. Free markets have always won, and they have always provided a higher standard of living. When people cry out for the government to do something about it, they're asking for the government to manage the economy. They are asking for the government to lower their standard of living. Ultimately, what you get is the USSR or Mao's China. That is what a managed economy brings you. It's time for you to take action. It's time for you to get educated on this, to find out more, and then to voice your opinion, to make yourself heard.
If we want changes in the economy and changes in our monetary system, change in our foreign policy, the people have to speak out and decide that they want to change, and they have to make it very clear to the politicians that that's what they expect. And matter of fact, that's one area where I tend to be more optimistic, because I think the people are learning with the work that you've done and others. They're learning something about monetary policy. But the most important thing is that people understand the nature of freedom and the role of government, and money being a major part of all that.
So now that we've seen the economics of the fall of Rome, it's time to take a look at the options in front of us for the USA. Will we choose more debasement, more war, more intrusive government, more cronyism and special interests, more taxation and regulation, and less freedom? Or will we choose sound money, stable foreign policy, restrained government, a level playing field of fair laws for everyone, sensible taxation and regulation, and maximum freedom? I want to thank you for watching this series and for sharing these videos with your friends and family. If you'd like to learn more, join me at hiddensecretsofmoney.com for more interviews and discussions. Much of this episode was based on material from my book, and you can download a copy for free. Until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.